Hi, welcome to our kitchen. I'm going to give you a tour and tell you a little bit more about our design process. When we designed this kitchen about 6 years ago, we put a lot of thought into making sure the aesthetic is what we liked at that time, but also something that can evolve with us and something that we will hopefully still like in 10 years. Trends kind of come and go, but what do we truly like and who are we as people at the core? And what are things that are easy to update as we go along if, say, trends change and we want to update it in the future? And from the usage standpoint, we also wanted to be really conscious and think through how we will actually use the kitchen. Remember, we designed this before kids, so we knew this needed to evolve over time as our family was going to be growing. And so we wanted to design for something that can stand the test of time and can evolve with our ever-changing needs. Also, specific to the modern look, having functional storage to keep clutter out is really key to keeping that aesthetic on the daily. You can't have clean lines if you have clutter all over, and to solve clutter, you basically need a home for everything. And all of this is also within the context of wanting to build sort of a passive house. And within that, the premise is every extra square foot of space that you add to your house is going to be extra space that you need to spend energy on heating and cooling. And heating and cooling tends to be the biggest expenditure of energy in a passive house. So in a sense, we couldn't just go for extra storage just because every extra square foot, we wanted to have a purpose behind it. So basically we were working with a Venn diagram between form, function, and energy needs. So with that background in mind, I want to share with you our kitchen design and planning process. And as we go along, I'll give you a tour and explain some of the decisions we made in this kitchen. Everything that I chose for this kitchen was intentional, and I'll try to remember to give the reasons why, but if I miss something and if you have questions, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to answer. So first, let's start with the planning and listing out your needs. Remember, the better upfront effort you put into the planning phase, the less time you'll have to spend later organizing and reorganizing different spots over and over again. The first part of figuring out what you need in a kitchen is listing out what you need to actually store. And this includes everything that you own that needs a home in the kitchen. Now, it's important to list out everything that you have, like including your pots and pans, plates, cups, coffee supplies, spices. If you use a lot of bottle sauces versus like little spice jars, you use giant big bags of spices. How about small appliances like a toaster, a coffee maker, the bigger countertop type stuff that you own but you may not want displayed on the counter? How about a rice cooker? Some other things that are easier to forget include cleaning supplies and trash bags, extra bulk items, party supplies like paper plates, paper napkins, plastic silverware if you have that. And it's also good to just budget some extra wiggle room for the miscellaneous items you might forget. For example, like saran wrap or aluminum foil. The list kind of goes on, but try to list out as many as you can think of. That way you know what kind of storage you would need, whether it's like a deeper drawer for the big jars versus like a more shallow drawer if they're all little things. Now you can either list these out on paper or you can use Asana or Trello, one of those boards that have different columns. I personally use this second method because I find it easier to visualize like a column of pantry shelves and then a column of front cabinets, and then I can move items around on those columns and I can easily see what's missing, and it also helps me visualize what kind of depth a drawer or a shelf needs to be. The other benefit of Asana or Trello is that it syncs across different devices, so sometimes I'm working on it on my laptop, but then inevitably as I'm out and about, I would have my phone with me only, and I would think of a thing that we need to store and I need to add it to the list. So that was a good method of keeping track of everything and being able to add to the list when I want. The second part of the needs equation is the energy needs. This is more pertinent if you're trying to build an energy efficient home or a passive home. And if you're curious, I did a video on the design of a passive house and the considerations there, so feel free to check that out. For our family, the storage needs are so varied. We are avid cooks and avid eaters, and there's a multicultural component as well, so we do need a rice cooker, but we also need that flat skillet surface for dosas. We need all of the different things for each food item, and they all end up being quite bulky, and so it was very important to me to factor in all of that and make sure we make a home for everything. The third piece of the needs equation has to do with the audience or the users. This reminds me of my other Airbnb design video where I talked about target demographic, but in this case the target demographic is you and your family, and in a sense you should know this person more than really any guest that would stay at an Airbnb. Like, how tall are you? Do you have kids? Do you have pets? What are your personal preferences? The reason I mentioned height is that counter height is actually somewhat adjustable. There is a range to what normal counter height is. So if you and your partner and really everyone in your house is on the shorter end, there's really no reason to have super high countertops. And did you know, back in the day, older countertops used to be lower and they've kind of risen in height gradually over time. So there is no hard and fast rule about exactly how many inches a countertop needs to be. Now, obviously, if you're planning to sell the house at some point, which I'm sure most people are, and you don't want to do something that's completely out of the norm, I get that. But even within the norm, there's a little bit of wiggle room. If you have kids and pets involved, this would factor into your decisions about the color of the cabinets and what kind of material you end up using. Just from our experience, white cabinets can be kind of a hassle to keep clean when little hands with peanut butter and jelly fingers are touching and staining all the time. Black cabinets are also difficult to keep clean because your fingerprints would really show. If you have kids and pets, I would also advise against like a high gloss surface. I know some people really like that look, and especially in modern places, it can look really cool, but that requires a really sparkling clean surface and is basically unrealistic for us, for our family at this point in time. Same thing for stainless steel though. When there are a lot of fingerprints on it, just doesn't have that same look. Because of the kids, we've omitted bar stools for now, but as you're planning for bar stools, it's important to think about what your target audience is in terms of, do they need a back? Would it be dangerous to have a backless bar stool? Do they need that little rung as a footrest? And how many bar stools do you need? One really cool incorporation is this under cabinet niche. It is perfect for storing a little step stool for kids to climb on to wash their hands. The last part of this target audience discussion has to do with guests. Do you have people over at your house often? Do you entertain? And I know this is kind of a cliche thing that a lot of people say when they're designing their kitchen. They're like, oh, I want space for entertaining. I think this is a good spot to be really honest with yourself and really think about, are you actually hosting like nice fancy dinner parties with multiple course meals with grown-ups? Or are you throwing kid birthday parties? Or are you having people over, have a beer, sit in front of the TV and watch some football? All of those are all kind of entertaining scenarios but have very different needs. So it's important to think through the most realistic scenarios and plan for the practical aspects of those, in addition to kind of your aspirational dreams of what entertaining could look like. So some concrete examples from our situation. For us, entertaining mostly looks like having people over, grown-ups and kids, and having just a whole bunch of food. Sometimes it's a potluck, sometimes it's a little more snack-based. So when we designed this kitchen, we wanted to make sure the entertaining experience is maximized for both the host and for the guests. For the host side, I'm usually one of the many people that would be cooking and doing stuff in the kitchen. I find this linear kitchen to be really helpful in kind of not physically barricading off people, but it indicates to people that where the rug is in this kitchen is kind of the workspace. That's where the stove is, that's where the sink is. So generally people don't help themselves to that area, and I find it really helpful if I'm like busy making something in the kitchen. The island has been really helpful in naturally kind of designating that this is the guest area. So typically we would put out food and drink, other more accessible items, things that are meant for guests on the island, and it naturally makes sense to people and they are able to help themselves to whatever they need. The island is also big enough to allow for a work side and a guest side. And naturally the wood part that is a little bit of a step up, we usually reserve for guest items, whereas the side with the white quartz, we usually reserve for the chef, for the cooking side. And this delineation seems to be really natural for all of our guests to understand. And I think everything just runs a lot smoother when everyone knows where everything is and everyone is comfortable in accessing whatever they need. Part 2 of the design process has to do with picking out appliances. And for this step, I really encourage you to go to an actual appliance store, even if you're not buying from that specific one. It's really good to kind of touch and feel the different surfaces, the buttons. Do they have like a good Do they have a good ding? I personally care a lot about the tactile sense in a kitchen, and those things are hard to figure out just on a website. And then if energy efficiency matters to you, there's usually a yellow sheet on the appliances that tell you how many kilowatt hours this appliance uses per year. And so if you're trying to build an energy efficient house or a passive house, you can kind of collect that data and use that to guide your decision making. I know for us, we took all those numbers and put that into our calculation of how many solar panels we need for this house. As you're shopping for appliances, it's important to again think of the audience, which is yourself, who's using it and what you need to use it for. So for example, for us, we don't need a double oven. We're not huge into baking, but we do absolutely need open fire gas stove, and we need a powerful hood on top of it because a lot of the stir fries, a lot of this heavily scented food that we make needs to be vented out. And along with that, we then need a device for makeup air because we have a highly insulated house, and the makeup air device helps prevent causing negative pressure when the vent hood is on at the most powerful settings. Paneled appliances are typically more expensive than stainless steel, and it also makes the door quite heavy. We did it for the fridge inside and also for the freezer in the back pantry. We chose to panel it because it's such a huge surface area and we like the look. However, for the dishwasher, since it's on this side of the island, we didn't think it would make that big of a difference aesthetically. An additional tip on appliances and efficiency: having a separate fridge and separate freezer tends to be a lot more efficient than having a combo fridge on top and freezer at the bottom, or vice versa. Moving on to step 3, now that you have a rough idea on your list of needs and also what appliances you're interested in getting, you can now work on the layout. There are many potential options: a more linear kitchen, a galley kitchen, an L-shaped kitchen. You can find plenty of inspiration online. I like using Houzz because they have a nice collection and the filters are really easy to use. A few things that can help you decide at this point are whether you have like a window that you want to incorporate, if you have a design style that dictates what layout of kitchen works best, and then whether certain functionality is important to you, whether you're entertaining or where you want the chef to face when they're cooking or doing dishes. Do you want to look out at the window, or do you want to look at the rest of the house, or what does that look like for you? Hopefully all of the things that you figured out in step 1 and 2 can help inform what layout would be most logical for what you need. Design aesthetic and functionality are so highly subjective, so make sure you take your time at this stage and figure out what works best. So the layout we landed upon is this kitchen that is pretty linear with a big-ish island for the entertaining reasons I mentioned, which by the way is also really functional for parents supervising children for meals. And from the aesthetic standpoint, we chose this because I like the idea of having this kitchen wall bookend this side of the great room, and then it allows for a back pantry way behind there, out of sight. The back pantry was a really wonderful way to deal with kind of the contradicting needs of wanting a really super modern, clean lined kitchen and having no clutter in the front, but then genuinely needing all the storage because we do have a bajillion things we really need. Like, none of this is frivolous stuff. We don't have like 50 mugs that can be thrown away. This is all actual cooking stuff that we use on the daily basis. I won't be able to go too in-depth on each drawer and each shelf and what's in everything, but let me know if you'd be interested in more of an organizational type video, and I can show you in more detail the logic behind where we store stuff. I'm going to show you a few diagrams of our kitchen layout, both from an aerial view and from an eye level view, and we worked with an interior designer to help kind of translate our ideas onto paper. We went through many iterations of this, and you'll probably end up having to do something similar just because your first idea might not exactly fit all of your needs. So as you look through, you might find things you need to tweak. Once you have a rough layout, you want to go through and make sure it's actually functional for what you need it for. So for example, we would go through these diagrams and label literally what each drawer and each shelf would be used for. And as we did that, we quickly realized that with just the main kitchen area wall and one side of the island, it wasn't quite enough storage space for what we needed. Also, not all storage spaces are created equal. Does an open shelf make more sense, or a closed cabinet, a deep cabinet versus a shallow cabinet, a deep drawer versus a shallow drawer? What would make the most sense for the items that you're hoping to store? Like for example, if you have like little birthday candles and a lighter, that fits better in a shallow, small drawer. But then if you have a lot of like large mason jars, large sauce bottles, that makes more sense either on a shelf or in a pull-out drawer that is really deep. And where do these stored items need to be? Is it a functional and reasonable spot? Like you don't want a daily use item put on the top shelf and every day you're supposed to take it down and put it back up. And you know what's gonna happen is that you will leave that toaster out on the countertop and never put it back again. So make sure you have a realistic storage/organization layout. As you go through your layout, I have a few more questions for you to hopefully double check the functional aspect. A, what is your workflow like between the kitchen, the sink, and the fridge? B, could the kitchen accommodate multiple chefs in the area or like a chef and a person cleaning up at the same time if that's what you want? And C, will your workspace have adequate light? I think one thing that we made sure to have is under this little niche, add those specific targeted work lights. And additionally, the hood also has specific lights for the stove. That helps us see what we're doing as we're cooking. And then D, where are your electrical outlets? So all of your little appliances will need electrical outlets. And also sometimes you will be charging your phone in the kitchen because your phone is always out of battery at the most inconvenient time. I have a few ideas for where these outlets can be tucked in. First is a pop-up outlet like the one we have here. We installed these into the countertop and they're really handy, but they still stay out of the way when we don't need them and helps the countertop stay pretty clean lined. The second idea is to tuck it into a built-in shelf. So this coffee shelf has this coffee grinder already plugged in, and this is a great idea for your staple small appliances that you use on the daily. The third idea I have is to put your electrical outlets into this like little step down part of the island. I know this look isn't for everyone, but for us it's just so functional to have that extra spot to hide a couple things and for plugging in Google Home and plugging in a charger for the phone. And then part E of my extra question is that some people like an extra sink in their kitchen, either to keep dishes away from their like front pretty sink or like a more accessible sink for their guests to go wash their hands or, you know, grab some water. So if that is important to you, you have to kind of budget where that space would come from. Another use I've seen for an additional faucet is just right over the stovetop to fill a pot if like you make a lot of pasta or a lot of soup that requires water directly on the stove area. We chose not to do a second sink or second faucet because that doesn't really add a lot of value to us as a family, but my use case is probably different from yours, so this is something to think about. The last tip I have for you regarding the layout is that you'll likely be working with a cabinet company, and the company will likely take your drawings, even if it's from an interior designer, and translate it to what they like to work with so that their people, their staff who are installing those cabinets and preparing the materials can understand better. Sometimes in that translation, there's mistakes that are going to be made, and this was the case for some of our stuff too. And so it's important to double check literally every measurement that they list on this document, because once those cabinet parts arrive, it'll be a lot more costly to fix a mistake. Fourth step of this process is picking out the finishes, the paint colors, the fixtures, the lights, all of the materials that go into the space. We have a modern and minimalist, but still kind of warm and casual vibe that we like to go for, and trends come and go, and so we try not to be tied to a specific trend either in terms of layout or in terms of finishes, although of course I also acknowledge it's not entirely possible to be completely even unaware of the trends, and so part of that will seep through in the design process, and that's okay. I'd say just kind of think through why you like something. For this step, I like to pick out all of the finishes all in one go and piece them together. You will notice that in the custom building process, if you're working directly with a builder, it often feels like they're going to come to you and say, today we want all of your light fixtures picked, and today we want all of the paint colors of the whole house, and then on a different day they'll say we want all the countertops like kitchen and bathroom, and then if you have a surround in your fireplace, all that comes from the same shop. And so what your builder might nudge you to pick is generally based on who is coming to install. Like the countertop guy from the countertop shop would deliver a bunch of things, and that's why all of those things get batched together. Versus designing by room, in a kitchen you would have countertops, you would have paint colors and cabinet people, you would have these little fixtures picked out, you have the appliance guy. And so from a design angle, it makes a lot more sense to think about all the finishes together in a room by room basis. And that's something that you'll just have to do on your own, because generally builders don't prompt you that way. If it's possible, I highly recommend recommend getting swatches for different pieces of stuff. So like a little swatch of this paint color on this wood of a cabinet, next to this handle, next to a swatch piece of this countertop, and next to the piece of island wood, whatever finishes that will come together in your space. It's really good to see them all together within the same lighting, kind of next to each other, and see how they interact with each other. For us, we had these off-white walls, white cabinet, black accents, and a neutral warmish gray tile to contrast for the backsplash, a similarly gray sink, and we also have this white quartz, but I don't know if you can tell, it has this golden, warm, brownish veining. We also have this darker walnut wood echoing the rest of the house. We have gold hardware on the handles and the light, a fun rug, and then a concrete floor. We were going for a contrast of light and dark, inorganic and organic, serious and more playful, and then super geometric shapes like the light versus some more organic elements like plants and this organic textural tile with this kind of squiggly, almost hand-drawn look of an edge, but then pairing that with a very neat stacked installation style. You also have to remember your finished product will include some furnishing and decor. So like plants and other furnishings, picture frames, that will add to the organicness or more geometric stuff if that's your balance. So you still have to factor that in your planning stages, which I know is a lot of imagining the space ahead of time, but the more you can do this at the planning stage, the easier the execution will be when you're eventually shopping for the decor and furnishing touches. One tip on modern color schemes, because modern design styles can sometimes look really cold and uninviting, and we love black and white, but just stark black and white with clean lines can look like a hospital. We made sure everything had a slight warmth to it. So this isn't like actually white, this is a warm white, and then the walls are actually almost a beige color. The black is also not actual black, this is like a dark brownish black. Same for the gray sink and the gray tile, they're actually warmer grays. And one additional tip on this color scheme situation is that if you live in colder climates, in the winter with the snow and the gray cast, everything in the house just looks a little bit blue. So you almost have to balance that with warmer lighting, warmer colors to not make the whole space look like a creepy hospital. We've lived in this space for 5 years now, and throughout that time, our needs have definitely changed. We have a growing family and we have new kitchen gadgets, it seems, every year. And because of how much thought we put into it in the beginning, I think it has really helped this house evolve with us. And I still love this house as much as the first day I started living here. It did take a long time to design and plan. I'd say the design and building process was a year and a half at least, but I'm really happy how it turned out and I love this space. And I have a pretty good feeling that I will still love this space just as much in 5 years and hopefully in 10 more. If you like interior design, make sure you subscribe to the channel and let me know if there's a specific room you'd like me to do a walkthrough on next. I plan to do a series of videos on the custom home building process, the lessons I learned, the mistakes I've made, including some that were in this kitchen. They're less noticeable mistakes, but they're there and I see it every day. But there's still avoidable mistakes that hopefully I can shed light on in a future video. And I'm also planning to do some design updates on our beach house in Florida for Airbnb purposes, and I would love to share more about that process in a video in the future. Basically, I just have a lot to tell you and not enough time. Anyway, for now, if you're interested in interior design, feel free to check out my other video where I talk about how to design Airbnb spaces, and I will see you there.